Shalom Aleichem. We're exploring Look at the Sichas, volume 22, the Sicha on Parshas Emor. This is on the section of the Moadim, which is sort of the second half of the portion. It's the section that discusses all the holidays. It begins with Pesach, and then it goes in the cycle of the year, Spreadsheet, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and completing with Sukkot. And the Rebbe is going to take a look at some of the details, specifically of how the Torah describes Sukkot by contrast to the way it describes Pesach, in numerous differences that are very striking. And based on that, the Rebbe explains the meaning of Sukkot in a whole different way, let's call it, than Pesach and other Yom Tovim, which is going to be extraordinarily illuminating and very, very, let's say, crystal clear of how it's spelled out almost in the text itself. So let's begin by taking a look at that section. It's chapter 23. So right at the beginning of the chapter, it starts with Shabbos, and then by verse 6, it goes into Pesach, and the text is, as it reads, the 15th day of the first month is the festival of Matzah, 7 days should eat Matzah. And then you have to fast forward all the way to verse 34, which is Sukkot. 15th day of the 7th month, the festival of Sukkot, 7 days for Hashem. And then at the end of that section, which is verse 42, it tells you finally to sit in the sukkah for 7 days, which is kind of curious. Then in verse 34, he starts introducing sukkahs. He doesn't say you have to sit in the sukkah. He just calls it the festival of sukkahs for 7 days. And this is 8 full psukim with a lot of detail. Nothing about the mitzvah of sukkah. In those 8 verses, it says it's a 7-day festival, and the first and last days are proscribed from malacha, from doing work, and you have to bring all kind of offerings. And later on in that same section, it speaks about the Daled Min and the Lulav and the Esrog, etc., etc. Everything is covered. Not one mention of the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah. Just before the end of the section, in verse 42, which I believe is one verse before the end of the description of sukkahs, it says, and by the way, Basukkos Teishvu Shivas Yamim, in the sukkah shall you sit or dwell for 7 days. So it's interesting the way it's laid out. So we take a look at the Medrash, and the Medrash points out and asks, why does the Torah emphasize right at the top that it's called the festival of Sukkot? It could have said that there's a 7-day festival. Why does it refer to it as a festival of Sukkot, since Sukkah is not mentioned until the end? If the Torah wanted to emphasize that it's a festival of Sukkot, it should have began by saying, it's a 7-day festival of Sukkot, sit in a Sukkah. It doesn't do that. It introduces it as a 7-day festival of Sukkot. No mention of the Sukkah, mention of everything but, and then all the way at the end, it mentions Sukkah. So clearly it seems that Sukkah is like a PS. The mitzvah of sitting in the Sukkah is almost a footnote. It's by the way, one might think. So why does it right at the beginning begin by calling it the festival of Sukkot? This is the Medrash question. Says the Medrash, I'll tell you why. Because the Torah wants to make sure that it's clear that when it says at the end of the chapter, for 7 days shall you sit in the sukkah, you should know that it's those same 7 days that were mentioned earlier. So if the paragraph, this sukkah's paragraph, would begin by saying it is a 7-day festival, but not referring to it by name as the festival of Sukkot, so I would say, yeah, there's a 7-day festival. Not related to Sukkot, you got the mitzvah of Simcha, the mitzvah of sacrifices, the mitzvah of the 4 minim. And then at the end, there's another 7 days when you sit in the sukkah. In fact, the language at the end, when it says to sit in the sukkah, it doesn't say, Basukkos Teishvu B'Shivat Hayamim, in the sukkah shall you sit in the 7 days, which would be a reference to the prior 7 days. No, it just says you sit in the sukkah 7 days. We don't know which 7 days. So because of these two problems, that A, it does not mention the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah early on in the chapter, and B, when it does finally mention it, it doesn't say sit in the sukkah for the 7 days, the aforementioned, but sit in the sukkah 7 days. How do you know that the same 7 are these same 7? And that's why, says the Medrash, the Torah refers to it right away at the beginning of the section as the holiday of Sukkot. So you know that the 7 days, which are going to be written much later, when you're supposed to sit in the sukkah, it's the same 7 days as the holiday mentioned earlier. That's the Medrash. So the Rebbe asks 2 questions, and then another 2. But the main 2 questions is, so why does the Torah write it in such a strange way? Number one, why do we not mention the mitzvah of sukkah immediately? So much so that because we don't mention the sukkah immediately, right? The paragraph begins again in 34, verse 34. On the 15th day of the 7th month is the festival of sukkah, 7 days for Hashem, and it doesn't tell you to sit in the sukkah. And as the Medrash points out, that it's so mysterious because it does not command you to sit in the sukkah that you might think that you don't sit in the sukkah and that the sitting in the sukkah is another 7 days. It should have said it. And this would not be against the Torah's custom because, as you see by Pesach, which I have on top of the screen at the beginning of this section, it says right away that on this and this date is the Yontif of Pesach, Chag HaMatzos, and it right away says 7 days eat matzah. What is a holiday? It comes with instructions. It's Pesach, eat matzahs. It says it right away. It doesn't make you hold your breath until the end. By Sukkot, it acts so strange. On this and this day starts a 7-day festival. We call it Sukkot, but we don't tell you to sit in the sukkah until the very end of that section. So why don't we do it then? That's question one. And the second question is, when it finally does tell you to sit in the sukkah, again, it says it in a way that's abstract. It doesn't say, Basukkahs teshu b'shivas hayomim, that in the sukkah shall you sit in the 7 days, which would be a clear reference to the aforementioned 7 days, and would lay the whole issue to rest. It would be very amply clear from the text that it's the same 7 days. No, it's written in a mysterious way. Basukkos teshu shivas hayomim. By the way, dear Jews, sit in the sukkah 7 days. When? What? How? 7 days. We don't even know when those 7 days are. And for that reason, the Torah has to avoid that mistake by referencing the holiday, calling it the holiday of Sukkot right at the beginning. It would have been much easier if it just said, there's a festival, and you sit in the sukkah for 7 days, and you're done with it. These are the Rebbe's 2 questions on the Torah based on this, on the Medrash, which makes it clear that the verses are mysterious and, so to speak, problematic. While we're at it, I'm doing the Sicha out of order in a way that I think is much easier. That there's 2 other questions. Why does it say there's a festival of Sukkot 7 days? Compare the verse of Pesach to the verse of Sukkah. In the verse of Pesach, it only calls the first day the festival of matzahs. The 15th day of the first month, Chag HaMatzos LaShem. Then it says 7 days you should eat matzah, which incidentally our sages have interpreted to mean that you can't eat chametz because the obligation of matzah is not all 7 days. But the actual title, Chag HaMatzos, in the Torah is only the first day. When it comes to Sukkot, the Torah makes an emphasis to say Chag HaSukkos Shivas Yamim LaShem, that it's a 7-day festival of Sukkot. That's a very striking difference. And question 4, just an interesting observation. We find Sukkah has only one name in the Torah or in Chazal, in the writings of our sages, or in Minhag Yisrael, the custom. Sukkot is called Chag HaSukkos, period. This is setting aside the other names that for agricultural purposes. That each one of the holidays has an agricultural name, Chag HaOsef and Chag HaKotzer, the harvest, etc. That is, but that's agriculturally related. But other than that, the name of the holiday is Sukkot. When it comes to Pesach, the Torah refers to it as Chag HaMatzos. However, in sages, in the Chazal, and Gemara, and Halacha, and in the custom of the Jewish people, including in our Siddur, we refer to it as Chag HaPesach. So that's also another curious thing, that it has 2 names and Sukkot only has 1. So these are the Rebbe's questions. The first 2 are sort of bothering us, and the second 2 are just curious to us. Bottom line is, they're all pointing to something, and the Rebbe is going to say, let's put it all together, and it will shed light on what Sukkot is about, as opposed to Pesach. So, to make the differences very clear, here are the 4 questions. Feels like we are ready for the Seder. We got the 4 questions. Where am I? we're repeating once again the 4 questions. And now let's take a look at the same questions in a little bit of a spreadsheet. Comparing Pesach to Sukkot. It's really the same 4 points being spelled out in the spreadsheet. When we look at Pesach, so the first thing is the mitzvah of matzah is said immediately. As Sukkot, the mitzvah of Sukkah is not said until the end. Conversely, additionally, when it speaks about the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, it says you should sit in the sukkah for 7 days, not the 7 days. We made that point. Thirdly, Pesach is referred to as Chag HaMatzos only the first day in the text. Whereas in Sukkot, it immediately says that that there's a 7-day festival called the Festival of Sukkot. And finally, the idea that Pesach has 2 names and Sukkot only has 1 name. So the Rebbe, in his signature style, gives one explanation which brings it all to light and brings it all together. Says the Rebbe, the difference between Pesach and Sukkot in the most fundamental way is the fact that Pesach is a result of a historic occurrence. Something happened on that day in history. That's when Hashem took us out of Egypt. And that's why we observe it. In fact, that's why we eat matzah. Sukkot, nothing happened on that day. There's no historic recording that happened on the 15th day of Tishrei. So what makes it a yontif? The fact that we're commanded and we, in fact, sit in the sukkah, that makes it a yontif. So you could say that the holidays are opposites. Pesach, because something happened on that day, let's call it Hashem did something on that day, that's why we have to respond and do the mitzvah. Sukkah is the opposite. Because we do it, let's call it it's bottom up. Because we do the mitzvah on that day of the mitzvah of Sukkah, that's why it becomes a holiday. The mitzvah is not a result of the holiday is a result of the mitzvah. Because there's nothing else that happened. There's nothing else that makes those days exceptional. Nothing happened historically on those days. Let's call it, so to speak, chas v'shalom, random. Because Hashem commanded you to sit in the sukkah on those days, now it becomes a holy day. So it's the opposite of Pesach. Pesach is a result of an event, Exodus. Sukkah is a result of the mitzvah observance. And therefore, what would come out from that? That in Pesach, what is the main yontif? Exodus. Matzah is a detail. It's a mitzvah. But it's not the whole yontif. Whereas in Sukkot, the whole yontif is about this mitzvah. The whole yontif, the entire yontif becomes about the mitzvah of Sukkah. The Rebbe gives a proof to this. This becomes the main point of the Sicha, that unlike other Yom Tovim, when it comes to Sukkot, the mitzvah of Sukkah is not in a detail. Since you have a Yom Tov of Sukkot commemorating whatever, you got to sit in the Sukkah. No, sitting in the Sukkah is the Yom Tov. That's in fact what makes it a Yom Tov. And the Rebbe illustrates this in a few ways. One of them is the following. It's said that Shmini Atzeres, regel b'fnei atzmai. Shmini Atzeres is a separate festival from Sukkot. That's why we make a Shachayanu on Shmini Atzeres. So in the Gemara, when it says Shmini Atzeres is a separate yontif, so Rashi explains 3 words: She'ein yoshvim b'sukkah, that you don't sit in the sukkah. It's like interesting. What is Rashi saying? Says the Rebbe. What Rashi is saying is exactly this point. The definition, the very definition of the yontif of Sukkot is that you sit in the sukkah. That's what Sukkot is. Shmini Atzeres, you don't sit in the sukkah. That makes it a separate yontif, because the yontif is about sitting in the sukkah. Contrast that to Pesach. You see, the mitzvah of eating matzah is only the first day, first night to be exact. And yet the whole yontif is one yontif. We don't say, well, the second day is a new yontif because you don't have to eat matzah. It's not true. Because clearly the eating of matzah, first of all, it's only obligation the first day. But the rest of the 7 days is really a preclusion of chametz. But more importantly, the holiday is not made up by the fact that you eat matzah. That's not what makes up the holiday. The holiday is made up by the fact that it's the anniversary of Exodus. The eating of matzah is an add-on. Since you had Exodus, you have to eat matzah. And the obligation is day one, and it's extended for the whole week because we're not allowed to eat chametz. But it's an add-on, the concept, the obligation of eating matzah. It's a to-do list. It's a to-do on the holiday. Whereas Sukkot, that's not a to-do. That's what Sukkot is. That's what makes it Sukkot. Otherwise, there's nothing remarkable about those days. It's a simple observation that Rebbe is making to illustrate the, let's call it the essential definition of the mitzvah of Sukkah vis-a-vis the holiday of Sukkot. It's not just connected. It's not just an important mitzvah. It is the holiday. It's what makes it a holiday. The fact that you're obligated, and in fact you do, sit in a sukkah. That makes the days whole. So again, how do we illustrate it? Number one is that Rebbe illustrates it by the fact that Shmini Atzeres is called a separate holiday because you don't sit in the sukkah. That's the words of Rashi. So it's very, very striking. Because you don't sit in the sukkah, it's not sukkahs. The sukkah is sitting in the sukkah. There's another thing that brings in a footnote that brings home this point. Again, this is the essential point. This is the essential point of the entire Sicha. That the festival is all about Sukkah. Then brings in a footnote from the halachists that what would happen if somebody, I guess, accidentally made the bracha shachayanu when they built the Sukkah? Now, we don't make shachayanu when we build a Sukkah. We don't even make a bracha when we build a Sukkah because we make the bracha when we actually sit in the Sukkah. So we sort of complete the mitzvah, that's why we make the bracha. But let's say somebody was all inspired and excited, they're building the sukkah. Let's say it's Erev Sukkot, and they're so excited, they make shechayanu on the sukkah. Halacha is, I don't know if this is the final halacha, the Rebbe brings it in the footnote, certainly there's such opinions. Apparently this is the halacha, that if you made shechayanu on the making of the sukkah, you do not repeat shechayanu on the holiday that night. We're not going to say that about other Yom type. We say this about Sukkot because the mitzvah of building the Sukkah is so intrinsic to Sukkot that if you made Shechayanu, you celebrated the mitzvah of Sukkah, you already celebrated the holiday of Sukkot. It's just one and the same. So once the Rabbi gives this fundamental thing, again, that the whole holiday is the mitzvah of Sukkah. Without it, you don't have a holiday. There isn't an anniversary that you're honoring. So now we can answer all our questions and all our differences. For clarity, let's first answer them in the four questions, just like on Pesach. Let's answer the 4 questions, and then we'll see it in our spreadsheet and the differences. So question one is, why don't we mention the mitzvah of Sukkah immediately like we do by matzah? So the Rebbe points something out which is counterintuitive. You see, by matzah, the Torah says, it's the holiday of Pesach, Chag HaMatzos. Eat matzah. That indicates the only reason why it's called Chag HaMatzos is because you have an obligation to eat matzahs. Not that it's really Chag HaMatzos essentially. As we know, it has another name called Chag HaPesach. Because stuff happened on that day. However, the Torah says on the 15th day of the first month, Chag HaMatzos Lashem, that day is Chag HaMatzos. And sort of why? Because 7 days eat matzah. There's a mitzvah to eat matzah. So the instruction of that day is the reason why it's given that name, but not that it's really that name. Not that it's really essentially all about matzah. It's not all about matzah. It's about many other things. It's about Exodus. In fact, if you read fine print, you know that for 6 out of the 7 days, you don't even have to eat matzah. So it's not all about matzahs. It's called Chag HaMatzos, yeah. But why? Because you have to do it, because of something important that has to be done on that day. So the emphasis right at the beginning that you have to eat matzah then de-emphasizes the value of Chag HaMatzos as a name of the holiday. It's not really the holiday's name. It's just a name deduced from the fact that it has an important mitzvah called matzah. Whereas Sukkot, it doesn't say you have to sit in the sukkah right away at the beginning. It says for 7 days, a 7-day holiday called Chag HaSukkos. If it would say right away, you must sit in a sukkah, we would say, aha, why is it called Chag HaSukkos? The same reason why matzah is called Chag HaMatzos, because of the instruction that you must do, because of something you got to do. It doesn't say you have to sit in the sukkah then. It doesn't say it till the end. it calls the entire holiday Chag HaSukkos to indicate this is much bigger than something that you have to do. This to do becomes the Yontif. So this is a little bit counterintuitive. It's a little inverse logic, but because it's trying to point out that this Yontif is called Sukkos, because the whole Yontif is related to the mitzvah of Sukkah, it omits mentioning that mitzvah until the end, to explain that the name Chag HaSukkos is completely and thoroughly the name of this holiday, unrelated to an instruction, which would make it a limited connection. No. It's called Chag HaSukkos. This is the essence. It's not a limited connection. It's the full connection, because the entire Yontif is only based on the mitzvah of Sukkah. That's question one. Question two. Why does it not say in Sukkah shall you dwell for the 7 days? Which would have made more sense. The whole discussion is talking about the holiday of Sukkot. And then it should finish. And on Sukkot, shall you dwell for the 7 days, the aforementioned. But that would mean that you have 7 days, which have their own definition, based on some historic occurrence or what have you. And then we come along and say, and by the way, since you have those important 7 days, commemorating whatever, I want you to eat in a sukkah during those days. But that's not the case. The Torah writes it, in sukkah shall you sit 7 days. That's the first premise, even though it's written at the end for the aforementioned reason, the answer to question one. But when it finally does get to it, how does it describe it? In sukkah shall you dwell 7 days. There is no the 7 days. There isn't a historic occasion which pre-exists the mitzvah of sukkah. Without sukkah, these 7 days are ordinary days. There isn't any the 7 days. In sukkah shall you dwell for 7 days. Now that you have the mitzvah to dwell 7 days, those 7 days become the. But the Torah doesn't write the sukkah, in the sukkah the 7 days. There is no the 7 days. The first premise is the mitzvah sitting in sukkah. So that's question two answer. Question three. Why does it say right at the beginning, it's the festival of Sukkah 7 days? Word by matzah, it just refers to it as the festival of matzah. 1 day. Because of the aforementioned as well, because of this pivotal thing. That what? That the entire Sukkah 7 days, this is the festival of Sukkahs. The entire Yontif, the entire 7 days, its very definition is the 7 days that we're going to discuss at the end of the chapter, which we're going to be commanded to sit in the Sukkah. Those are the days that make up, that mitzvah is what makes up the 7 days. And therefore, right at the beginning of the section, it says it's a 7-day festival. And what's it called? One name only, Festival of Sukkahs. And why? Because you're sitting in the Sukkah. Which answers also question number 4. Sukkahs has one name, Pesach has 2 names. Even though biblically it says Chag HaMatzos. But really, the name that the sages use and the name that it's customary in our prayers and the Minhag Yisrael, it's called Chag HaPesach, because really that's what it is. It's the holiday of Exodus. That's what really happened. Chag HaMatzos is really just the mitzvah of that day, whereas in Sukkot there's one only name. The whole festival is related to the mitzvah. So if we translate this same message that we just discussed into our little spreadsheet here. Again, in Pesach, it says the mitzvah of matzah immediately, whereas Sukkah, it only says it as the end. Because in Pesach, we're trying to explain that the reason why it's given the name of Chag HaMatzos is only because it has a particular mitzvah called matzah. Whereas Sukkah, the whole holiday, it's not a limited connection of Sukkah to the holiday. That's what the holiday's definition is. Explain why it has why it says in Sukkah shall you do 7 days and not the 7 days, because there's no pre-existing 7 days. The first premise is the mitzvah of the 7 days. I'm repeating myself here. By Pesach it says 15th, the festival of Matzahs, where it says by Sukkot, it's a festival of Sukkot 7 days. Because by Pesach, the festival of Matzah is really only related to the first day when there's a commandment to eat matzah. It's not really, the whole thing is not Chag HaMatzos. It's given that name because of the mitzvah of eating matzah, which is primarily on day 1, frankly. Whereas in Sukkot, the whole festival becomes a festival of Sukkot. It's squarely all of our sukkahs, which explains also why it has only one name. There's only one definition of sukkahs. It's not a commemoration of Exodus. It's not really a commemoration of anything, even though it's a commemoration of Hashem miraculously sitting us in the tents. But it's not commemoration on that day. Could have been any day. In fact, it should have really been arguably on the same day as Pesach, because that's when Hashem took us out and sat us in Sukkot. But Hashem chose a winter day, as explained in the Torah, because he wanted to show the nations that we don't care, we're just doing the mitzvah. For its sake, we're not looking for the best weather. But bottom line is, that's the only name it has, because that is what defines the Yom Tov, not a commemoration of any anniversary that happened on that day, but rather the mitzvah itself defines the Yom Tov. Okay, so far the Rebbe has helped us understand the anomalies of the way this parsha is written, and the way the mitzvah of Sukkah is way at the end, and the wording, and the way it's different from matzah. The takeaway, though, to sum it up, is this little line here. The festival of Sukkot is exactly that. It's a festival. It becomes a Yom Tov because you have the mitzvah of Sukkot. I don't know if this is unique. Every other Yom Tov, there's a Yom Tov commemorating a certain occurrence, and because of that occurrence, you do the mitzvah. No, the mitzvah makes it a Yom Tov, because there's nothing else making it a Yom Tov. So now that you have that, you understand that the Sukkah is so intrinsic to the Yom Tov of Sukkot. It's the definition of the Yom Tov is the mitzvah of Sukkah. Now, based on that information, let's segue into another area related to this Yom Tov, and that is the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. So it's brought out in the Arizal, and there's a discussion that it's better to shake the lulav and make a bracha on the Daled Minim in the Sukkah. We know halachically it doesn't have to be in the Sukkah, it can be done in shul, it can be done in the house. It seems that traditionally people would do it in shul right before Hallel. That's why the bracha of shaking lulav is found in the Sidurim right before Hallel. However, it became a widespread custom, certainly in Chabad, that we make the bracha on the lulav in the Sukkah. We connect the lulav to the Sukkah. In fact, it ever brings in a footnote that our minhag is that we actually bind the lulav in the Sukkah on Erev Sukkahs. It's brought down in the Shalom, it's brought down in many halachic sources, but apparently the original source is the Arizal, that he says, Tov levorech ala lulav besukkah. It's good to bench the lulav in the Sukkah. Comes along the Rebbe and says, is this purely Kabbalah, or does it have a basis in halakha? If the whole source is the Arizal, I mean, obviously we're going to do it, and we trust the Arizal. But does it also have halachic basis? Nominally, one might say no. Halachically, the Sukkah is one mitzvah, lulav is another mitzvah. And why do you have to connect it to? The Rebbe says, however, from the language of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, where he uses, he doesn't just say the language of the Arizal, tov levorech, it's a good thing to do, but he actually says a mitzvah min hamufka. It's an optimum observance of this mitzvah if you do it in the Sukkah. He seems to say that it has halachic basis, and it's brought down in many svarim of halacha. It seems to elevate this to a halachic thing and not just Kabbalah, if you can say the word just, but meaning it also has halachic thing. And this becomes a very important thrust by the Rebbe to indicate, to show that many things in Kabbalah have halachic basis as well. So what would that be in this case? What would be the source of such a thing? So the Rebbe gives two approaches. The Rebbe celebrates approach number 2. So, first thing the Rebbe says, what do you mean? You're looking for a halachic basis that you have to check a lulav in the Sukkah? You have to do everything in the Sukkah. The language is you should dwell in the Sukkah 7 days, and we're supposed to do everything. We're supposed to eat, we're supposed to spend your time there, you're supposed to sleep in the Sukkah. You're supposed to even learn Torah in the Sukkah. You have to look for allowances that if a person needs to concentrate, they could daven and learn outside the Sukkah. But basically, the principle is whatever you do in the house, do in the Sukkah. So if you're supposed to do everything in the Sukkah, certainly you should do a mitzvah of lulav in the Sukkah, which is such a fundamental, important part of the holiday. So you already have a halachic basis, already in approach number 1, that with the Arizal's words is not just a nice Kabbalistic thing, but it also has halachic basis. What do you mean? You got to do everything in the sukkah. That's a halachic thing. But then the Rebbe not suffice with that. Because then, if based on that, that means that this is a detail in sukkah. It's not that the lulav must be done in the sukkah. Everything should be done in the sukkah. So includes the lulav. But this becomes something that's part of sukkah observance, not part of lulav observance. The sukkah observance is do everything in the sukkah. You eat, you drink, you sleep. You shake the lulav. Maybe it's on top of that list because it's an important part of sukkah. But it's not pshat. This wouldn't indicate that this is a halacha in the laws of lulav. Thou shalt try to shake the lulav in the sukkah. No, thou shalt do everything in the sukkah. So lulav goes on to the list, but it doesn't yet indicate that the Arizal's message that it's good to bench lulav in the sukkah is really an upgrade in the mitzvah of sukkah on halacha. We don't have that yet. And the Rebbe points out that there's two ways to look at this, and this becomes one, and two becomes the two approaches that we just discussed. Should we say it's clear that there's a halachic connection to the words of the Arizal? But is it merely approach one, that it's part of the mitzvah of sukkah observance because everything's got to be done in the sukkah, including lulav, or no? Is it even more so? And it's also part of the optimum observance of the mitzvah of lulav, and that would make that lulav has a connection, has a connection of content to the mitzvah of sukkah, not just because the sukkah is all inclusive. And what would be the difference? The Rebbe says, whenever you have a discussion like this, is it A or B? There's got to be a halachic ramification. I heard the original recording of the Sicha. The Rebbe said this is one of the things that the Rogatchover was famous for, Rogatchover genius, that when he wanted to split a hair, when he wanted to show a difference, the Rebbe uses those words. Is it just splitting a hair just for fun, so to speak, for mental exercise, or does it have more relevance? And if it says the Rogatchover, it has a halachic distinction. If it's A or B, that makes it more meaningful. Says the Rebbe, in this case, it can be a very clear A and B. If it's just one, if it's number one, that the reason why you should check the lulav in the sukkah is because it's part of the observance of sukkah, which includes everything. What if it's raining? Halacha says if it's raining, you're exempt from sitting in the sukkah. So therefore, you don't have to wait. It's time to shake the lulav and it's raining. So you don't have to go to the sukkah. This is putting aside midik Chabad that we make believe it's not raining. But halachically, if it's raining, you don't go to the sukkah. You don't have to eat in the sukkah. Nowhere is it written that you have to postpone your meal until it stops raining. If it's raining, you're exempt from sukkah. Eat your meal in the house. The same thing if it's raining. Shake the lulav in the house. There's no reason to wait. There's no value. Conversely, if we go by number two, that the fact that the lulav should be shaken in the sukkah is an optimum value in the mitzvah of lulav, because just everything should be done in the sukkah. Lulav is sukkah related. So if it's raining, wait. Do the lulav optimally. The footnote the Rebbe alludes to a halachic example of this. Imagine if you're supposed to daven Shemona Esrei standing up, but you're traveling and you're in a position where you cannot stand up. Back in the day, you're riding on a horse or an animal, and it's going to be dangerous to stop. Or nowadays, you might say you're on an airplane, and if you stand up, you'll get into trouble because the seatbelt light is on or whatever. So halacha says that if you cannot stand, you can say the Amidah sitting down. However, that's only if you cannot wait. But if you can wait and you're not going to miss the time of davening, you should wait so that you could stand up and daven in the proper position. That's because the detail of standing by Shemona Esrei is intrinsic to the law of davening, and therefore, unless there's no choice, you should wait it out. Even though there's a principle that you should do a mitzvah as soon as possible, yeah. But if you can do the mitzvah a little later and do it with its proper optimum precision, you do wait. You override the principle of doing the mitzvah as soon as possible. So that would be included here too. So again, to recap, if lulav is separate from sukkah, the only reason to do lulav in the sukkah is because you should do everything in the sukkah. If it's raining, you do nothing in the sukkah, halachically, and therefore no reason to wait. Shake the lulav and move on. But if you hold that the lulav is intrinsic to sukkah, it's connected. The lulav, by definition, is a sukkah mitzvah. There's some kind of real connection in content. If it's raining, wait, so that you could do the lulav in the sukkah. It's the optimum use of the lulav. Similar to the person who's told to wait to daven standing up rather than sitting if he's not going to miss the time of the mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, I'm going to lean to say that it's not only one, but it's also two. Not only approach one, that there's some kind of connection because of the Sukkot application, but there's a halachic relevance to the Arizal's teaching, also in the definition of lulav. Where do I get it from? First of all, the Alter Rebbe includes this message in the laws of lulav. If it was only part of the general principle that you should do everything in the Sukkah, you should have written in the laws of Sukkah. In the Sukkah, you should eat and sleep and learn Torah and shake the lulav. No, he puts it in the laws of lulav because it's connected to lulav. Also, the language of the Alter Rebbe is mitzvah and amufchad. This is a mitzvah, up to a mitzvah observance of lulav. So you see that there's a halachic relevance in lulav. Says the Rebbe, what's the explanation? The aforementioned. The essence of this Sicha, as I said before, that what? That the entire definition of the festival is the mitzvah sukkah. That's what sukkah is. It doesn't commemorate anything else. It commemorates the fact that you're supposed to sit in the sukkah. So being that lulav is a mitzvah related to sukkahs, of course it should be in the sukkah. Extraordinarily powerful sort of proof and argument based on the whole aforementioned that this Arizal, which is normally seen as a Kabbalistic custom, is really directly in line halachically with the very definition of sukkahs. And the Rebbe says this also is found in the wording. Remember we said that by sukkahs it says, in sukkah shall you dwell 7 days. It doesn't say the 7 days. And we explained why. Because there's no the 7 days to speak of. Until you start sitting in the sukkah, there is no 7 days. There's no anniversary. There's no pre-existing condition, so to speak, of those 7 days. Which 7 days? What 7 days? Sit in the sukkah 7 days. Now that you sat in the sukkah 7 days, those 7 days became the 7 days upon which you will do the other observances. So compare that to the language when it says by lulav. The language is l'kachtem lachem by yom harishon. Take for yourself on the first day. It doesn't say on first, on a day, on the first day, because here we already have the pre-existing yontiv of sukkahs, and we're throwing onto it the mitzvah of the lulav. So to sum it up, what did we accomplish in the Sicha? What did we do? We did two things in terms of the bottom line takeaway. First, we proved from the whole discussion and the layout of the parsha and the seeming anomalies of the way the parsha and the wording of the parsha is that the festival of Sukkot is all about the mitzvah of Sukkah. That's its premise, and that's really what the holiday is all about. And therefore, no part of Sukkot can be separated from that. And based and continued to that is that therefore the lulav blessing in the Sukkah is not, which the Arizal instituted, is not only a Kabbalah, but it's also halachic related, and not just because that's part of everything that has to be done in the sukkah, but it has a lulav connection because lulav is a mitzvah given to you for sukkah. So l'kachtem lachem, take the lulav on the first day of this yantiv. And what is this yantiv? It's a yantiv of sukkah. Here comes the fun, the Hasidic takeaway. The Rebbe says like this. What does this tell us? What does this whole thing tell us? It's a striking difference between Pesach and Sukkot. Let's call it Pesach. God initiates and we respond. Sukkot, we initiate and then God responds. This is in general known in Chassidus. The month of Nisan is the tzaddikim, the service of tzaddikim, and the month of Tishrei is the service of Baal Teshuvah, right? And Nisan, Hashem initiated. Everything was miraculous. And Hashem did everything. We just followed. And every year, that's what we do. That's the reenactment, whereas Sukkot, with the introduction of Elul, the month of Tishrei is our service, and we do the work. You know, we initiate. It's the avoda, the service of us. And that's spelled out here too. Pesach is a yontif. Why? God took you out of Egypt. So he made it. As a result of him doing it, we have to respond. What do? We observe the yontif, we eat matzah, we 7 days. But it's top down first. It's a holy day because he made it holy. He made miracles. Doesn't get better than that. Sukkot, nothing happened. He didn't do anything. Sukkot, Hashem says, now let me see what you can do. I want you to do something holy, which the mitzvah of Sukkah. And now those days become holy as a result of your mitzvah, says Hashem. So we do the mitzvah, and then Hashem makes it holy days. So what was accomplished? Not only this concept which is not emphasized much in this Sicha, but it's clearly there, this concept of bottom up versus top down. But what's the result of the bottom up? Why is bottom up so much more special? Or what's the specialness of the bottom up? But now we took an ordinary day and made it holy. When you talk about Hashem made it holy because he made miracles, it's a holy day. It's not nothing ordinary about it. Hashem made miraculous things. They're holy days just because, before a Yid even does anything on that day. Here, because the Yid does the mitzvah, they become holy days. That means that they're, so to speak, ordinary days, and we make them holy. There's something very special about it. And if the purpose of creation, the purpose of our Avodah is to make reveal Hashem's holiness in the lowest places, the greatest accomplishment is find me the most tachtonim, the most ordinary, the most basic, and take the ordinary and make it holy. Just like Hasidus will talk about the fact that there's a greater accomplishment, for example, in mitzvahs versus Torah study, because mitzvahs are taking physical stuff, taking the hide of an animal, turning it into Torah. There's a greater accomplishment in that vis-a-vis did it b'tachtonim, because you're making something physical, ordinary, holy. Similarly, here in the realm of time, Sukkot does that more than Pesach, more than any other biblical holiday. It takes an ordinary day. It's really ordinary because nothing happened on that day. You know what happened on that day? You made it holy by your mitzvah. So you're really making the ordinary holy. The Rabbi brings in a foot. Say the comparison of Yom Tif compared to Shabbos. Shabbos Hashem made holy every 7 days. Yom Tif, the courts would decide, so to speak, with Kaddish Yisrael v'Asmanim, which is the bracha that we say in Kiddush and Yom Tif, and in the davening, and it indicates Kaddish Yisrael v'Asmanim, Hashem sanctifies Israel, the Jewish people, and the holidays. Where Shabbos doesn't say Mekadesh Yisrael v'Shabbos, just it's Mekadesh Shabbos, and it's explaining the Gemara that what Hashem makes Shabbos holy, whereas Yom Tif Hashem makes us holy, and we make the Yom Tif holy. Because in Yom Tif, in every Yom Tif, really, there's an aspect of this bottom-up thing, this concept that we take the ordinary and make it holy, and that's why the Bezdin, the court, the Jewish court, would really decide the calendar based on the witnesses, and even today that we have a calendar, but that calendar is set up by the sages, and therefore, it's, so to speak, that's one of the edges of Shabbos, that it's intrinsically holy, but one of the edges of Yom Tif is, what's one of the edge that Yom Tif has, that the Yidden make it holy. Of all the Yom Tovim itself, we have the rabbinic days, and the Rabbi in all the Sichas brings it in the footnotes here, celebrates the fact that, for example, you have the second day of Shmini Atzeres, the Simchas Torah, and it's a greater celebration than even Shmini Atzeres. Because the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Gol is the rabbinic days, in a sense, are greater, because here we infused holiness into the ordinary. It's not even a biblical day holy, it's just rabbinic. So the Rebbe, in the line with that whole concept, which is brought in Chassidus and the Kutei Torah, etc., the edge of Yom Tov to Shabbos and the edge of the second day Yom Tov versus the first day Yom Tov, in the sense of bringing holiness to the ordinary, the Rebbe says in a certain way, Sukkot brings that to all compared to Pesach and the other Yom Tovim in the aforementioned. The Sukkot is only holy because you do the mitzvah of Sukkah. So in the context, compared to Pesach, it's ordinary days. It becomes holy because you sit in the Sukkah. And therefore, it's a greater accomplishment in the Dira B'Tachtonim aspect of turning the ordinary holy. And that's in line with the principle. I just said to you before that a mitzvah has an edge versus Torah study, because Torah study is studying holiness. Mitzvahs, you're taking the physical leather and making it holy. But it's brought down also in Torah and Chassidus that even greater than a mitzvah sometimes is the idea of Kol Ma'asecha L'Shem Shemayim. All of your behavior should be for the sake of heaven. That to find Hashem in all of your ordinary, even in your business dealings, in your day-to-day eating and drinking, to do them L'Shem Shemayim. And in a sense, there's a certain edge there because we're trying to bring Hashem to the lowest place, and this is more low. It's more ordinary. And it's a whole big deal that ordinary, we can bring Hashem to ordinary things by doing it l'shem shamayim. But it's still not a mitzvah. On Sukkot, because the whole theme of Sukkah is something that we do. We make the whole Yom Tov because of our actions, which means that it becomes holy days, even though they're ordinary days. This theme is expressed also in the fact that in the Sukkah you do ordinary things. It's an exceptional mitzvah. It's a unique mitzvah. That whatever you do in that sukkah, you eat, drink, you sleep, it becomes into a mitzvah. How could eat, drink, and sleep suddenly become a mitzvah? And the answer is because that's the theme of sukkahs, that the ordinary is made holy. Whereas a whole year, the ordinary things, kol ma'asecha, is l'shem shamayim, but it doesn't become a mitzvah. In all your ways, you know God, but it's not becoming a mitzvah. And here, all of these things, you're sitting in a sukkah, you're doing business, you're eating, you're drinking, you're schmoozing, you're relaxing, and then suddenly all of these ordinary things become holy. This is very much in line with the theme of sukkahs, which again, I said before, we make it holy because we make this into a mitzvah. It's only a yontif because we're doing the mitzvah of sukkahs. Bottom up, and it's the ultimate transformation of the ordinary. And the Rebbe says this theme is extended in the fact that this is one of the only mitzvahs, or the only mitzvah, that the entire person is in the mitzvah, the entire human being. It's not like you're doing the mitzvah on your head and your arm with the tefillin or shaking the lulav with your hand. The entire person is in the mitzvah, which is very much in line with the theme here of Dina B'Tachteinim, that you permeate everything. So that becomes the Hasidic takeout of point number one of the summary. Since the whole Yantiv is all about the mitzvah of sukkah, you have this concept that the ordinary became holy, and therefore it's extended in all your ordinary activities in every part of the person. Says the Rebbe, now there's a great takeaway from the extension of that, which was point two of the Sicha, and that was that the lulav is blessed inside the sukkah, and that becomes not only a nice thing from the Arizal, but this Arizal is translated to be a halachic value. And not just that it's a halachic value, because you're supposed to do everything in the sukkah, but it's a halachic value in the mitzvah of lulav itself. So the Rebbe says, let's translate this on a spiritual level and take a lesson. We know the lulav represents the Talmid Chacham, the Torah scholar. Of the four types, the lulav one's the one who has Torah scholarship as his main emphasis and not so much mitzvahs. And we say, by saying that the lulav should be shaken inside the sukkah, what we're saying is that even though you're a Talmid Chacham, don't forget the value of mitzvahs. The sukkah is a mitzvah. Not just a mitzvah, the sukkah is the fact that the faith, Hashem tells you what to do, He surrounds you, that you're subjugated to Hashem's will, which means the commitment to mitzvahs. So you got to shake the lulav in the sukkah. Translation, you're a Talmid Chacham. And don't forget that you're learning Torah because Hashem said so. And that you have to also do mitzvahs because Hashem said so, and it's not just about your Torah scholarship. But here the Rebbe takes it to his conclusion. The Rebbe says that here too, remember, the Rebbe argued before that this idea that you have to shake the lulav in the sukkah, it could be just because of the mitzvah of sukkah, or it could be a detail in the mitzvah of lulav. And the Rebbe proved that it's the latter. So now the Rebbe says that's also true in the spiritual. One way, if we only say, like we said before, approach number one, that the lulav, it should be done in the sukkah because that's the beauty of sukkah, that it includes all activities. So that would be translated spiritually. You're a Talmid Chacham, you're a lulav. Don't forget, you have to also do mitzvahs. As the Talmud says, if a person says, all I want is Torah study, he won't even have that. Because if you're not doing mitzvahs, that means you're not really doing it for Hashem. It's a problem. So make sure you do mitzvahs too. Make sure you have the sukkah with the lulav. But if we say that the completion of the lulav finds its perfection only if it's in the sukkah, that means that not only you got to do mitzvahs too, and not just be a Talmid Chacham, because otherwise you're not a kosher Jew. Your Torah study will be lacking. You want to do the lulav to perfection, do it in the sukkah. Translation, you want to really succeed in learning Torah, make sure it's surrounded by the sukkah, by the aura of subjugation and bittul and faith and servitude to Hashem. And the reason is because Torah study at the end of the day is beyond the human mind. It's Hashem's mind. And therefore, if you're not approaching Torah study with a certain humility and trying to understand that which is really inexplicable, beyond the human mind, I'll never understand it. The approach needs to be, it's like Nasa ben Ishma. It needs to be the lulav in the sukkah. It's extraordinary Sicha. I hope I did justice to it. The takeaway to me from the entire Sicha, even though the Sicha has two parts, a discussion of the meaning of the Yantiv of Sukkah and the discussion of the Arizal's instruction to shake the lulav in the Sukkah. But to me, if I wanted to look for one thrust of what the Rebbe is doing in the Sicha. The Rebbe is trying to point out that don't separate Pnimius HaTorah of Nigla Torah. Don't separate Chassidus and Kabbalah from Halacha. And therefore, the example is that Arizal says it's good to shake a little in the Sukkah. I'm going to show you this is Halacha. And why is the Rebbe so excited about that? Because the theme of Yiddishkeit is that everything spiritual permeates the physical. Everything Kabbalistic permeates halacha, so to speak. And this becomes a prime example of it. That Arizal says a Kabbalistic thing, shake the lulav in the sukkah. Says the Rebbe, yeah, but this is halacha, and this is the part of the mitzvah of lulav. And this same theme is spelled out also in the fact that a person can be a big Talmud Chacham. And if he's lacking chassidus, he's lacking bittul, he's lacking emunah, which is the things that we learn from chassidus, how to be a yid to understand that really Torah is beyond the mind. They won't really understand even Torah. The logical appreciation of Yiddishkeit is only to be gotten fully by the super rational. So it's a connection of emunah to seichel and chassidus to nigla.